Hi, John.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing? I'm okay. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright, Blogging Heads TV and Meaning of Life TV, and this is The Wright Show, available in both video and audio podcasts. And you're John Horgan, internationally celebrated curmudgeon. And since this is Meaning of Life TV, we're going to talk about the meaning of life.
Great. One of my favorite topics.
It actually is. That's the irony, you know? I mean, on the one hand, you're obviously a kind of a seeker, right? This has become evident in your work, and yet you're also a debunker. So you're like looking for the path and debunking every path that comes your way. It must be uncomfortable.
I don't know. It works for me. It might make some of my targets uncomfortable. But I like the word seeker.
Before we get into this, I should say you're the author, in case there's anyone who doesn't know, The End of Science, which is kind of relevant to all this because it has to do with the limits of knowledge, but also the book Rational Mysticism, which is relevant to it. The Undiscovered Mind is kind of relevant to it. Anyway, you may make reference to any one of these books at any point. Now, go ahead. You like the word seeker.
Yeah, because, it's sort of a cliche, but it's one of those cliches that I think is true, which is that the seeking is more important than the destination.
Oh.
And I think it's more important to worry about the meaning of life, to see that as one of the most important questions that you can consider when you're alive, than to actually come up with an answer to it. Because I think all the answers are a little bit incomplete at best.
Mm-hmm.
And you should always be thinking more deeply about whatever answer that you temporarily come up with. That's the way I'd put it.
And you also think that there is, in principle, no hope of ever finding the answer?
Well, I think it's possible to come up with a kind of framework for thinking about the question and ruling out certain kinds of answers, and that's what I've tried to do in some of my work. And lately, when I've been thinking about the meaning of life, I've tried to make the argument, and this is something that I tried to spell out the last time I saw you, before Nantucket, when we both spoke at that Unitarian church in New Jersey, which is that most people think of the meaning of life as being in the same general category as philosophical truth or even scientific truth, that there is a meaning of life and we can discover it and then defend it rationally and so forth. And I think, and that's what I believed for a long time myself, and I even thought that the quest for truth was the most important, most meaningful activity we could engage in. And that's one reason why I became a science writer, because I think science is our most powerful way of knowing reality. And I wanted to be part of that, not as a scientist, but as a journalist. Now I think of the meaning of life as being in the category of beauty. It's an aesthetic phenomenon. So when you find something that's meaningful for you, you respond to it in the same way that you would respond to a beautiful piece of art or a profound work of literature. And that's not, it's more a matter of taste. It's not something that other people will necessarily respond to. So I've been trying to, this is something I've just been thinking about for the last year or so. I've written a couple of blog posts about it. I haven't had an overwhelming response to it. It's not like everybody said, yes, this guy is absolutely right. But it's something that I feel as though I need to work on more and to persuade people of.
Okay. This is something that's said, right? There are people who say, if you say, where do you find meaning in life? They will say art, music, whatever. This is literature. This is something that gets said by people, right? It's not like a radical thing to say. It seems it's kind of. Maybe we should start by saying, what is the question? What would you find if you found the meaning of life? Are we talking about becoming convinced that getting guidance about how you should spend your life? This is my purpose. this is in life, or is it answering questions about the afterlife, or is it, there's a lot of different questions in the whole kind of, spiritual / religious / philosophical space. What if you...
What do I mean when I talk about...
What are you seeking if you're a seeker? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's obviously a really important question. To me, it is basically what helps you decide that life is worth living. So here, let me put this in a really blunt way. I have been in a situation at various times over the last, 5 or 10 years where I've been talking either directly to young people or talking to them through their parents usually, who are, these young people are very depressed. Some of them are doing really self-destructive things like shooting heroin, things that could easily kill them. All right, and then I know other kids who are just suicidally depressed, not necessarily taking drugs, but they don't see the point of living. And so I actually have had people come to me and say, I have a son or daughter who's in despair or severely depressed. Do you have any ideas for how I can talk them into wanting to be alive? And to me, that's kind of distilling the meaning of life down to its essence. And it's a pretty, first of all, nobody should really have to answer that question. But when I try to answer it, I actually fall back often on the few experiences that I've had, and mainly they've come through psychedelic drugs, where I have felt that it's really miraculous that we exist, that anything exists, that there's a universe, and that this universe produced this little planet that has these sentient creatures on it that can have a conversation like the one we're having right now, where they actually wonder about their existence and question the point of it, and they have intelligence. They have this kind of seeking, questioning attitude toward reality, and I find this consoling. Now, for some people, it's not necessarily consoling, and it's interesting to me. I wrote a whole book about mysticism, these sorts of transcendent experiences that people have. I've talked to a lot of people who claim to be enlightened, and some of them say that this sense of really acute wonder isn't a part of their mystical experiences. A lot of them, it's more a question of bliss and unity and feeling that life is eternal, these sorts of consoling things. And I've had glimpses of those sorts of realizations as well. But to me, the essence of the mystical experience is the sense that we're really extraordinarily lucky to be alive, and that we should cherish every moment that we have, even when the kind of circumstances of life suck. Again, I don't know, it's not like, well, I know for a fact that most of the young people that I've tried this on have not responded to it, because I don't think it's something intellectually that...
No, it's one of the things you can't impart. Now, William James defined a mystical experience as, in a way differently than you're defining it for sure, but there's an area of commonality in the sense that he defined it as something that is noetic but ineffable. In other words, it imparts knowledge, but you can't describe the knowledge. So he was seeing mystical truth as something that almost by definition you're not going to be able to convey to another person verbally. So the reason life seems to you so amazing, that's like a feeling. That's not like an argument so much, right? You can try to make it a rational argument, like what are the chances that you wind up with a planet like this and so on, but at base, it's kind of a feeling, and I don't know whether William James would call what you're describing a mystical experience, but that part of it, I think, is characteristic of most things that people call mystical experiences. You can kind of try to describe them. You can't convince people of them who have not had them.
Well, it's weird because when I've talked about this, I've actually lectured about, mystical experiences, and I've tried to talk about these experiences I've had mainly while tripping, but it can happen in a milder form in other situations. And some people they're baffled, and their attitude is, it's just reality. What's the big deal? Why, what's so amazing about being a human being? And to me, it's totally baffling that they see the world that way, as something that doesn't evoke this response. But I have to say that going back to what you just said about this experience being ineffable, all the mystical scholars say that, and then they go on to talk ad infinitum about mystical experiences. Let me just say how intellectually I think about this sense of wonder. I'm always looking for convergences between these sorts of experiences, which are highly subjective, and what we can intuit rationally. That's my book, Rational Mysticism, was one long effort to try to come up with some kind of convergence between science and reason and these mystical intuitions that we have. And to me, one of the paradoxes of modern science is that as it has explained more and more about the universe and about our reality, about where the universe came from in the first place, about how it came about that it produced our particular solar system and Earth that was capable of producing life, how life originated in the first place, and then how life produced creatures like us. All the origin theories, or attempts to come up with theories of the origin of the universe and life and consciousness, are pathetically inadequate. And if they say anything, it's basically that the odds are almost infinite against the creation of this particular universe with laws that were capable of producing life as we know it. And then life, the origin of life, it's fascinating to me. It's still a complete mystery. There are all these different theories. The multiplicity of theories of the origin of life just indicates that the scientists don't really have a good grasp of why life originated. And then, life starts unfolding, and for like a couple of billion years, it was basically single-celled organisms. This is something that you've written about as well. So yeah, I'm sure you have a different point of view of this. But to me, if you're honestly looking at evolution, the odds that it would produce sentient creatures are just, again, almost, they're off the chart. And you put all those highly improbable events together, and you come up with something that is basically infinitely.
What do you define? What's your definition of sentient life? Are you saying? Do you mean intelligent life, or? For all we know, bacteria are sentient. For all we know, they have some subjective experience. And in which case, as far as the odds of evolution producing it, and that's almost, I think, not even a question. Either in this universe, sentience is built into certain, forms of structure, such as life, or they're not. It's like a metaphysical dimension that either your universe is going to have or it's not, right? It's not like evolution. It's not like grasping appendages or various other physical things that you can imagine evolution never having discovered, although my own view is that evolution tends to discover things very efficiently, and that's one reason intelligent life was in the cards. But sentient life is another question altogether. To me, that is a real source of wonder, because if it were not like anything to be alive, then life would be literally meaningless, right? There would be nothing wrong with killing things if they weren't capable of experiencing pleasure and pain to begin with. They would just be robots. So to me, that is really the core miracle of life, is the fact that it's like something to be alive. It's not just a question of these self-replicating structures coming into existence. Once that happens, yes, evolution is going to happen, natural selection is going to happen. But almost prior to that, at some kind of metaphysical level, and I mean metaphysical in the respectable philosophical sense, not the kind of Shirley MacLaine woo sense or whatever, I'm sorry, is she not still alive? I should quit using her. If she's not alive, I should quit using her as a synonym for
I have no idea.
for new age crackpot stuff. But the that's the the fact that it's like something to be alive. To me, that's the ultimate mind blower.
And not just that. So that's kind of you need that, but then it's a kind of sentience that also leads, as you say, you've got pleasure and suffering, and also our understanding of pleasure and suffering, and our understanding that certain things that we do and others do can increase or decrease our own suffering or the suffering of others, and that leads to the whole moral dimension,
right.
Which to me is completely intertwined with our concepts of meaningfulness. And for me, it keeps coming back to I think I brought this up the last time we spoke as well, to free will. So free will is kind of the the enigma and the riddle of consciousness. To me, it's crucial to a resolution of some of the questions that we have about the basis of morality. One of the deepest questions you can have is at what point do sentient creatures start to have free will? Are we the only creatures with free will in the universe? And of course,
we don't even know that we have it. I mean, that's the source of tremendous contention.
Right. Well, this is one of,
I know, this is a hobby horse of yours. You think if we don't maintain a robust belief in free will, the entire world will fall apart?
Pretty much. Let's put it this way. I think that our belief or disbelief in free will and in freedom, and I've used free will and freedom pretty synonymously, that they have consequences in the real world, and that to the degree we do not believe in free will, or we think that our fates are determined by, I don't know, our brain chemistry or our genes, our evolutionary adaptations that we inherit, that we are less likely to seek better futures. Mm-hmm. This is something I get very, very self-righteous about and rant about on my blog, and have ranted about in my books as well, because I think we're living in one of the most deterministic eras of science that I've seen in the 30-some years that I've been writing about science. And I think that has political consequences. I think it affects, for example, the degree to which people are willing to entertain the idea that war can be abolished once and for all.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's, of course, the trouble with free will is that it's hard to imagine, It's like, it's easy to imagine things causing things, It's easy to, and in fact, we talk as if we expect that everything that happens has a cause. Yeah. Unless we're going to invoke a supernatural cause, we expect that it has a material cause. And if indeed everything that happens in the physical universe, including the realm of human behavior, has a physical cause, then you start wondering, well, where is the room for free will? So it's actually, free will is on the one hand this powerful intuition. We all live our lives as if we feel as if we're making these decisions. But on the other hand, when we step back and examine the idea of free will, it's actually very hard to conceive of in the abstract compared to the alternative, which is a deterministic universe. A deterministic machine is an easy thing to imagine. It's like billiard balls on a table. But once you start trying to actually sketch out, draw a picture of free will, it gets kind of hard. So it's on the one hand a powerful intuition, and yet in a certain sense a very hard thing to imagine being the case.
It's not hard for me at all, and I don't know if you have this feeling. There are lots of things that I feel passionately about. I'm frustrated because I see something as just absolutely clear.
Right, I've noticed that about you.
Yeah, and other people are looking at me like, "What's wrong with you? Either you're an idiot, or I don't get you at all." When it comes to free will, people go far too quickly to the physical level of reality. Which of course,
well, if you can keep them from doing that, I can see how you might win the argument. Because
what's happening between us really has little or nothing to do with physics. We're in the realm of ideas now. Whoa.
You and I are talking, and all of the what you're calling ideas are manifest in sound waves, physical sound waves that travel from my mouth to your ear and back. So you can describe our whole interaction in principle in physical terms. So far as we know, I could describe my saying something that elicits a behavioral reaction from you in entirely physical terms. Sound waves go in your ears, they trigger a cascade of physical things in your brain and lead you to punch me or something. So I mean, calling something ideas does not necessarily get you out of the realm of the physical.
Everything is underpinned by the physical. I am a pretty hardcore materialist. I have a lot of non-materialists constantly trying to recruit me to their cause, and my attitude is that, if you don't have a brain, you don't have a mind. The mind is gone. The mind our minds are not capable of floating around free of any kind of physical substrate. But the content, the course of a mind, is not determined by its physics. It can be underpinned by the physics without being completely constrained by it. So, for example, when we're talking here, if I want to convey a certain idea to you, I can either talk to you about it, or I could email you about it, or I could show you a little video, or I could tell you to go read a book. That idea can be instantiated in all kinds of physical forms. The physical form is arbitrary. It's the idea itself that's important.
Well, that's true. Well, first of all, I mean, you have to be careful, because probably sending me the idea in those different forms will lead to somewhat different reactions.
Necessarily, it could be, the examples there's so many ways of talking about free will that sort of trivialize it, that come down to choices that don't really matter. The choices that I like to bring up are where large populations, maybe all of humanity or an entire nation, is at some kind of moral crossroads. And then a figure comes forward, like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, with some ideas and a particular way of expressing them that change people's minds, that get them, first change their minds and then change their behavior in a really important way that leads to moral progress. I don't see how you can make sense out of those sorts of really dramatic historical events without having a concept of free will. You can't have any coherent history of those sorts of things that is just strictly physical. It would make no sense at all.
Well, it would make sense. I mean, we as a matter of fact, we can't know all the details and trace the causal paths, but it's a coherent conjecture that all of this is a result of physical causality, and Gandhi is responding to environmental and genetic inputs that together form his behavior. That's a coherent idea. It's internally consistent. We can't verify it at a fine level of precision, but the same goes for free will, to put it mildly.
I don't know. Again, I guess I feel like I keep thinking that there's a slam dunk argument out there that I can make. I've thrown everything.
Hey, by the way, there's an interesting, this guy Conway, a mathematician who I think is still at Princeton.
Yeah.
He's got this argument. I forget. I don't think it's strictly its drift is pro free will, but I forget what he actually claims to have. He claims to have proven something relevant to this, and it's an interesting thing. I haven't looked at it in years, but I think he's the guy who created this famous cellular automaton called the Game of Life. I think he's that Conway.
I actually I met John Conway about 20 years ago. Do you remember something called Fermat's last theorem?
Oh yeah, well wasn't that proved by a different Princeton mathematician?
Yes, but he was painfully shy. And so I wanted to interview him for Scientific American. That guy's name was Andrew Wiles, I
Yeah.
think.
Mm-hmm.
And Princeton set up John Conway as the gatekeeper of Andrew Wiles. So I had to go through him, and I went into his office. He might have been head of the Princeton math department, which was, maybe still is, certainly one of the best in the country.
It's often ranked as number. I recently saw a ranking where it was number 1 in the world.
And so I go into, somebody steered me toward Conway's office, and I went in. And by the way, there's a new biography about him that's just published in the last few months. And
about Conway?
Yeah, and the author interviewed me, or asked me. She had heard that I had this story, and so this is also in her book. I went into his office, and there was just garbage all over the place. On the floor, empty wrappers and cans and all this shit hanging from the ceiling, all these weird geometric mobiles. And there's some guy hunched over his desk in the corner of the room, and his blue jeans were hanging down so that the crack of his ass was...
Okay, thank you. Let's move the anecdote along, John.
And he had hair going down almost...
Oh, John, move.
No, hair. This wasn't...
Oh, from his head.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And he goes, without looking at me, he goes, what's your birthday? And I said, June 23rd. He goes, year. And I said, 1953. And he kind of goes like, Tuesday. I'm like, he said, you were born on a Tuesday. Okay, give me another date. Anyway, he played this game.
This is the guy Princeton wanted you to see, not the guy who was like...
He's a wild and crazy character. I've heard he's come up with this proof of free will.
I heard a lecture about it. I listened to a lecture about it, and I should actually get him on Meaning of Life if he's still talking about this stuff. It's an interesting... It's worth your attention if you're really interested in this question, because it's not something you can easily dismiss.
Well, what I've tried to come up with a thought experiment in which an identical physical process, let's say an identical pattern of electrons, can produce totally different outcomes depending on the meaning of it.
Depending on the meaning of it?
Yeah, depending. So you can have two messages, but the recipient has some kind of different meaning, and of course that's
it sounds
that's
a little bit
instantiated in a different way.
It sounds a little like quantum physics, where the act of measurement influences what actually happens, and the question is it just the system's interaction with a physical measuring system, or is it actually human consciousness, human observation that brings the kind of final, the definite state, the physical state into being? But it's different?
I don't want to get into quantum mechanics because I think quantum justifications of free will are really unsatisfying, because they just introduced a random number generator.
Well, so far as we know, yes, but so far as we know. But anyway, I won't pursue that any further. But that is the thinking is that these things are truly random. Yes, that's the current consensus.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, God, Bob, if I can't convince you that free will.
No, I mean, look, I'm totally agnostic on free will. I mean, it's a mystery. It's kind of like consciousness. It's a true mystery. It's one of these things we may never be able to figure out. Because we're just like, it's like creatures in a video game figuring out the code of the game itself. They can't do that because they're just programmed by the code. They can't peer into the code. I mean, it may be, so I don't know, but I'm also ambivalent about whether I want free will to exist or not. I mean, sometimes, honestly, sometimes it seems to me it would be a great relief to believe in a deterministic world, because then I would be unburdened of the sense that I should be doing a better job of something. I mean, like, you know what I mean? It's like,
that's a terrible thing.
No, wait, just wait. I mean, you have this sense of mission about like, ending war or something, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, isn't it? This probably gets back to my being brought up as a Southern Baptist or something, and the idea that you actually have like a mission, right? I mean, you have a calling. This is a big thing. When you're growing up in certain Christian denominations, you have a calling. And I don't think I ever lost that sense. And it's like, it's really like, it's pretty burdensome. If you have this feeling that there's something you're supposed to do, and you're always going, well, am I doing a good enough job of it? I haven't saved the world yet. That seems like failure. Whereas, like, if I just thought, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, I would be out on the beach right now.
Freedom is maybe, if I have a value system, I've actually tried to think about what would constitute a viable utopia, and I can't come up with, you can imagine dystopias that are peaceful, where poverty has been abolished, even where everybody is happy, but they are meaninglessly happy, right? Let's say
who are you to say who's meaningless? I mean, you just said you started out by saying that for a life to have meaning is for you to believe that it's worth living. Well, if these people are happy, I'm sure they consider their lives worth living. So by your own definition, they have meaningful lives. And now you're coming along and deeming their lives meaningless.
I prefer to call this a paradox rather than a contradiction.
Okay.
To me, so let's say, you have Brave New World, where people are basically drugged into being calm and accepting of this dystopian, very repressive government, but elevating freedom to being the core of your society is obviously very troublesome, because you're free to fuck up. You're free
that's what I just said. That's the flip side of what I just said.
Yeah.
Is that you are blamed for your shortcomings.
So in other words, happiness is this part of this comes from the inadequacy of happiness as the goal of life or society. It just doesn't work because it's too easy to achieve technologically in a way that, at least when you're looking from the outside, it's horrific. But freedom definitely is problematic, and it can be extremely painful for the reasons that you were just describing. That if you feel that you see these options before you, where at great personal sacrifice you can commit yourself to some kind of mission to improve lives for others,
right.
But it will be bad for you and maybe be bad for people that you love, that can be a very painful decision. But
right.
That's exactly what makes life meaningful. And by the way, just going back to the contradiction that you're pointing out, that is something that's how I see the world myself. Others who want to live a country life existence or a country club existence, want to be investment bankers and just accumulate a lot of stuff and toys and, feel great about life because they got more stuff than everybody else. Power to them, as long as they're not actually hurting other people, which of course many of them are. So I try not to be judgmental about people who are making those sorts of choices, or even people who deliberately choose a life where all the decisions are taken away from them. Let's say they become fundamentalist religious people, or they go into the military, where a lot of their choices are minimized compared to the sorts of things that you and I might encounter in our lives, for example. And I try to be tolerant of people who make those sorts of choices. But again, when I'm trying to imagine this society in the future, I want there to be the freedom for people to choose those lives where they restrict their freedom, if you see what I mean. You want them to be aware of the freedom. Yeah.
So I mean, my question is: we're kind of amending your earlier definition of a meaningful life? I think now you're saying it's a life that is considered by the liver to be worth living, and is informed by an apprehension of true freedom. So a person's living a meaningful life if they are aware that they have the freedom to screw things up, and they're aware of the responsibility that entails, and they still consider their lives worth living. Yes, and it might be, the way I'm defining freedom, it has a lot. It's kind of it's sort of a social definition that your freedom is defined relative to others around you. But, that there's some people who make the choice not to be around any others. It's fascinating. So, you've gotten into Buddhism
recently, and I'm fascinated by the idea that, according to Buddhism and some other religions, the best thing that you can do with your life is to isolate yourself from others and just quietly contemplate the universe. That is, I actually have a lot of problems with that. It's certainly not something that I would want to do with my life. But if others want to do it, and again, as long as it's not in some way infringing on the freedom of others, and I don't see how it could, then power to them.
Well, there aren't many people who would say their aim is to isolate themselves eternally. I mean, as a practical matter, most people who do much in the way of isolating themselves as part of Buddhist practice would say that when they emerge from isolation, they are better people. They behave better towards other people. They're more appreciative of the beauty of life, and on and on and on. Now you might say there is still somewhere in Buddhist philosophy this ideal of enlightenment that makes perfect sense in perfect isolation, because you're apprehending the truth, and that's the whole point. But as a practical matter,
right?
I don't think it happens much.
Right. Monasteries are still social communities.
Right.
Yeah, I get that. But I've actually met, I mean, maybe this is kind of oxymoronic, but I've actually met hermits. I met a Christian monk who has been in total isolation for years, and he actually had to work out kind of complicated communication systems that would be consistent with his being a hermit and wouldn't break the rules. So email was not good, but he could use a fax machine.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, let's see, are you hearing that noise? Okay. Should we get into Buddhism and your whole, what should we get into? Why don't we stick with rational mysticism and say a little more about what you were up to, because it was one of those kind of personal journey books where you went around and did stuff in search of something. And it was under the rubric of mysticism, but one thing you didn't do much of, at least, was kind of the traditional age-old meditative practice. I mean, you signed up for you took like a one day, you like meditated for a few hours or something, but you didn't do something hardcore like go to a silent meditation retreat. You mainly did drugs, right? I mean, it was...
Well, I mainly interviewed. The problem was that, so I basically I was trying to revisit some of the things that I'd been fascinated with when I was a young man and even a teenager. So, I graduated from high school in '71, and I was part of that generation that was seeking new forms of spirituality that were dissatisfied with the religions of their parents. And to do that, people were taking psychedelic drugs, taking LSD and mescaline and mushrooms, and following some of these gurus who were coming over from the Far East, and reading mystical literature, Eastern mystical literature, or even going back to some of the Christian mystical literature and so forth. And all that stuff had I'd set it aside when I became a science journalist, but it never really went away. It was always there in the back of my mind, nagging me. And what was interesting was that when I wrote The End of Science about the limits of knowledge, the limits of scientific knowledge and rational knowledge, the question of mystical knowledge kept popping up. A bunch of my the scientists and philosophers I interviewed brought it up in various ways, and then of course at the end of The End of Science, I described this drug trip that I'd had in the early '80s. That was a huge loose end in my life that I really wanted to come to terms with. And
what was that drug?
I don't know. This professor at Harvard Medical School, when I described it to him, he said that it sounded like something very similar to a chemical warfare agent that the Army had actually stockpiled, called the initials for it are BZ. So it was basically like a kind of supercharged form of LSD that lasted, in my case, for about 24 hours, and that made me completely oblivious to this world, and I went into this kind of fantasy realm and had all these crazy experiences. I've written about it at length.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's even on my Scientific American blog, some of the gory details. And so I tried to make sense of this, and I sought out all these people, Buddhists, Hindus, Christian scholars who specialized in Christian mysticism. I talked to some Jewish mystics. I also was particularly keen on finding people who sort of had a broad overview of mysticism. I talked to a guy named Houston Smith, who I think you also have met.
I interviewed him on the old Meaning of Life TV, and that interview is still up in the archives. And he's a great. Is he still alive?
I haven't read an obituary, so I assume he still is. But
he's quite a he's a great man. I think he's somebody who really tries to see the best in everyone and everything, I think, including all the world's religion. His book on the world's religions is a very kind of sympathetic portrait of the world's religions. I don't apply the term wisdom to people very often, and I would call him a wise man. He's one of the few wise men I've met, and by wise I mean he combined. He's obviously very intelligent and very learned, but he also has, not to be corny about it, but he has a really big heart. Mm-hmm. He seemed very kind and gentle, although he could also be quite tough if he had to be. But so I interviewed all these people. One of the problems was that I also started interviewing the psychedelic folks. These are people who said, forget all that, the prayer and meditation, that takes too long. You just drop 500 micrograms of LSD and you were blasted into nirvana immediately. And some of them are real flakes, but some of them are fascinating to me. Well, here's the question. Did you think that any of these drugs got you or them closer to something you could call the truth about anything?
Absolutely.
Okay, what is that truth?
In my case, the one I don't know, revelation that has never gone away is what I was describing earlier, which is that this we have right now, our existence, is a miracle. It's infinitely improbable. I don't feel that viscerally anymore, but I can recall the feeling and then kind of dwell on it, and it makes a difference in my life. It makes me more grateful to be alive, to have had that experience in the past. I also had this really crazy experience on this chemical warfare drug that was where I thought I became God. This is at the end of science. And
John, that's been with you ever since.
Pardon me?
I said that's been with you ever since. I think that's been an enduring effect of that drug, so far as I can tell.
What, the craziness?
No, just you thinking you're God.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed the joke. I stepped on your punchline. Anyway, I had this experience. What was interesting about it is that actually looking back, the term singularity hadn't been coined yet. But in retrospect, I became the singularity. So the singularity is this idea that there's going to be some kind of giant mind meld in the future. All of us are going to turn into cyborgs, and then we're all going to meld into one great mind. And the ultimate version of this is that the whole universe becomes one giant thinking machine. And then my question is, what the hell will it think about? And I had this drug trip where I felt myself kind of flashing into the future and evolving at this accelerated rate, and I became this giant thinking computer at the end of time. And for a while, it was really great, and then it totally freaked me out. It turned into a really bad experience, and I was really frightened because I thought there was no reason for me to exist, and that I could even, just by thinking about it, cease to exist. I could die. And when I came out of the trip and was thinking about it, I thought that God is in he's in this perpetual identity crisis. He's terrified of being God, and he creates this reality we're in as a kind of distraction from his identity crisis. So if I have a theology that I entertain a little bit, obviously this is a really crazy one.
Yeah, I was going to point that out, so I'm glad you beat me to it. Go ahead.
This would be it. And I can't say that that's like an enduring truth that I came away with from my psychedelic experiences, but it is it works for me in terms of solving the problem of evil.
So it seemed to you like the human experience is kind of God working off nervous energy, or I think actually, didn't you quote me anonymously when you described this in The End of Science? I forget what metaphor. So you and I had talked about this before you wrote The End of Science, and I had said something like, "So we're like God chewing his fingernails" or something. What did I say?
That's exactly it.
And then in The End of Science, you quoted me but didn't use my name.
Right.
Okay, so now it can be told. Now it's been revealed.
Right.
That was me.
Yeah, that was great. And of course, you were saying it ironically because I sort of ranted out this whole experience to you, and you were looking at me like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah,
and then you said, "So like you're saying that all of reality comes down to God chewing his fingernails?" And I said,
"Yeah, that's it. That's my religion."
You nailed it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, so far, have you amassed much of a following for this particular sect?
Every now and then I hear from somebody who's had a remarkably similar experience.
If I were you, I would not have any further communication with these people.
Yeah, I hear from people who have had mystical experiences of all kinds and want to share them with me, and have written like a 700-page manuscript, detailing their experiences. One thing that was interesting, after I had this, I remember sort of talking to Freeman Dyson about it. And Freeman Dyson told me that there is a particular Christian theology called, it came from a guy named Socinus, I think it is, who also talked about God being sort of screwy and God evolving in time and having to overcome his own imperfections. There also is an idea like this in Gnosticism, and even in Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism has the concept of a kind of mistake in creation, or
now, is that related to the word tikkun, or
I think so.
Maybe I'm confused, but
I actually have a little passage in Rational Mysticism where I talk about the Jewish version of this. Apparently, Carl Jung also had an experience. He went through an extended period of mental illness. He had a nervous breakdown and often thought that he was God. And when he became God, he also felt that he was really screwed up and terrified. So anyway, I've learned about all these other similar versions of this kind of bizarre theology, which I don't know if that even matters to me that much. And I've decided that it's not, it's just me projecting my own anxieties onto the universe. And I think that any theology we come up with is, diminishes what this is. So I've sort of set it aside.
I think it's just as well. On the other hand, your earlier apprehension, which I guess also happened in a drug-induced state, that just of how amazing it is that all this stuff exists, we exist, sentient, and it's like something to be us. I think you're onto something there. It is super amazing, and one thing I don't like about, I guess some people, I don't like people who kind of are dismissive about it or just take it. To me, it kind of highlights, in a way, how far scientific inquiry is from answering some important questions.
Absolutely. There are a lot of convergences between us, and I think one is that we both are annoyed by some of the hardcore scientific atheists, some of whom have become more strident because of the criticism against them. Some of the criticism actually is unfair, but then some of these guys have become, more and more harsh in their denigration of religion. And I found myself in the peculiar position of defending religion against some of these attacks. I wrote a really, really nasty review of a new book by Jerry Coyne a couple of months ago for the Wall Street Journal and tried to spell out what I mean. My feeling is that science actually, again, it's this paradox. Science has explained so much about the universe. You know, the idea that we have a kind of history of the entire universe from the Big Bang up to the present, and we know pretty well the history of life and the history of the solar system, and we have a good understanding of our own physiology. But there are just enormous areas that we know nothing about, and especially about our own minds and about the role, the place of mind in this physical universe, and free will and some of the things we're talking about. I feel like there's these howling mysteries around us, and so I don't blame people for seizing even some of these archaic systems of meaning that people have used in the face of these mysteries, like Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism, or even wilder, crazy things like the theology I was just trying to explain to you. And I'm very sympathetic toward people like Thomas Nagel. By the way, he'd be great to have on the show.
Yeah, they said he wasn't doing any interviews about his book. It's a shame, because I wanted to get clearer on what argument he was making. I haven't read his book. He's, of course, this famous philosopher who I think is responsible for the fact that a lot of people, when they talk about what consciousness is, they say it's the fact that it is like something to be you. That's what it means to be conscious. That's a Nagel phrase from his essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Right. And he wrote this recent book that led him to be kind of excommunicated by a lot of scientists, in which he raised some questions about, I don't know, the completeness of Darwin. Well, maybe the completeness of Darwinism and Darwinian theory, but also the adequacy of materialism as a worldview, I think.
That was it. And what's fascinating about the book, I read it and I reviewed it, and actually ended up writing a couple of pieces about it. And it was a flawed book, but fascinating, and he was raising really important questions for people who look to science as their guide for understanding the universe, and pointed out some of these questions that we've just been talking about, where is mind just this kind of accident that just happened in this one place, one little corner of the universe at this very advanced stage in its evolution, or is sentience somehow intrinsic to reality from the very start? He's talked about the possibility of having teleological scientific theories. Those are supposed to be completely forbidden, but he suggests that maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe we should start to entertain some of...
By teleological, you mean the idea that there's a purpose to things, a purpose that was imparted in some sense from like a higher level of organization, or for something larger.
Exactly, and so the anthropic principle is a kind of teleological idea. The suggestion is that, well, the universe had to be structured the way it is so that it could produce minds capable of observing it, even if that is in the distant future. What I liked about Nagel's book, and what I've tried to point out in some of my own writings, is that we're really scratching the surface with some of these questions. It puts me in a little bit of an awkward position because I wrote this book called The End of Science.
Right.
I do think that the one realm of science that could blow everything wide open is neuroscience. All the sciences that attempt to study the mind and also come up with technologies for possibly enhancing minds, like brain implants and so forth. Neuroscience has really been hyped to death, and it isn't nearly as far along as many journalists and neuroscientists themselves imply in their popular books and so forth. But who knows? Something really crazy could happen. And there's this phrase that I like to use called the neural code, which refers to the software in our brains, the set of rules, the algorithms that turn physiological processes, action potentials in the brain into meaning, into what's going on between us right here. The neural code, I would say, is the most difficult problem that science has ever solved. It might be unsolvable. It might be too hard to crack. But if it is cracked, the possible consequences would be off the chart. It's difficult to imagine where that could possibly lead.
Okay. I have doubts about that, but we've now been talking for close to an hour, so we should probably hold those for another time. We have actually plenty of things to talk about if you want to do this again. For one thing, I wanted to get into your whole Buddhism shtick or skepticism of Buddhism shtick or whatever it is. And also, we could, we've touched on several things. We could talk about again the anthropic principle and this neural code thing. So maybe we should do another Meaning of Life TV dialogue at some point.
Sure, Bob. I'd be honored. You know where to find me.
I do now. Now that I've explained to you how a person downloads Skype. Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll do it soon enough so that I'll remember how to do this.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot. This was fun, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
All right.